Begin the game with pawn to e4, the most common opening move. Black replies symmetrically with pawn to e5. White continues development with knight to f3, and black answers with knight to c6. Then white places the bishop on c4, aiming directly at the sensitive f7 square. Now it is time for black to introduce an unusual idea. Instead of playing a quiet developing move, black jumps forward with knight to d4. On the surface, this looks harmless, just an offer to exchange knights in the center. But the move hides a deeper plan. White will almost always reject the trade. The pawn on e5 appears to be undefended, so the natural response is knight takes e5. This move also increases pressure on the pawn at f7, giving white the feeling of a strong attack and a clear advantage. This is where the trap begins. Black calmly plays queen to g5. To an inexperienced eye, it may look like a desperate attempt to save the position. In reality, it is the key move. From g5, the queen attacks two targets at once, the knight on e5 and the pawn on g2. The threat of queen takes g2 is especially dangerous, as it would expose white's king and ruin the kingside structure. Even though white seems active, the position is already uncomfortable. Saving the knight on a 5 is difficult, and defending the g2 pawn at the same time is even harder. Many players try to solve everything with a flashy move like knight takes f7, forking the queen and rook and grabbing another pawn. It looks clever and aggressive, but it actually walks straight into deeper trouble, turning white's apparent attack into a losing position. Black does not hesitate and continues the attack with queen takes g2. This move creates an immediate and terrifying threat. Queen takes h1, which would almost certainly result in checkmate. At the same time, the knight on d4 plays a silent but vital role. It controls important escape squares around the white king, making it nearly impossible for the king to run. White is suddenly fighting for survival. One possible defensive try is rook to f1, attempting to block the threat and protect the back rank. However, black simply continues with queen takes e4, delivering check while also winning another pawn. By now, the position is collapsing. Many players finally understand that disaster is unavoidable. To avoid immediate mate, white is often forced into the painful decision of playing queen to e2, offering the queen as a sacrifice. Black accepts with queen takes e2, emerging with overwhelming material advantage and a completely winning position. If white refuses to give up the queen and instead tries something like bishop to e2, the game ends in style. Black plays knight to f3, delivering a classic smothered checkmate made possible by the pinned pieces surrounding the king. Now for a second trap from a different opening, white begins with pawn to d4, and black boldly replies with pawn to e5, entering the England gambit. If white accepts with pawn takes e5, black develops actively with bishop to c5, immediately placing pressure on the center and preparing tactical ideas. According to most databases, white commonly continues with knight to f3. Black then plays pawn to d6, a move that looks completely natural and quiet, as if simply supporting the center. Here comes the psychological trick. Black plays knight to e7, a move that appears slow and even clumsy. It often looks like a careless pre-move. White usually cannot resist the temptation and captures the pawn with pawn takes d6, thinking they are winning material. At that moment, black instantly responds with knight to e7, reinforcing the illusion that the move was played automatically. Many opponents believe they can now win a piece and confidently capture the knight, and that is when the trap is sprung. Black strikes with bishop takes f2, launching a devastating attack on the king and turning white's greed into a losing position. This move becomes a powerful counterstrike, forcing the king to step away. Once the king is driven off its square, it can no longer defend the queen, and black simply captures it. In just a few moves, the position is completely reversed and the advantage changes hands. Now let's look at an even more dangerous trap, one that regularly catches strong and even-titled players. Without preparation, it is extremely hard to calculate correctly. The setup begins with pawn to d4. If black replies with pawn to d5, white plays pawn to e4, offering a gambit. After pawn takes e4, white develops with knight to c3, attacking the pawn and preparing to win it back. Black usually defends with knight to f6. Instead of rushing to regain the pawn, white calmly plays pawn to f3. After pawn takes f3, white responds with queen takes f3, recovering material and activating the queen. Black often becomes greedy and continues with pawn takes d4, grabbing another pawn. White does not panic. The reply is bishop to e3, developing with tempo and attacking the black queen. Despite being down pawns, white now leads strongly in development and has serious compensation. Black often chooses queen to b4, attacking the pawn on b2 and creating multiple threats, including pressure against the rook, the knight, and a potential trap if white castles long. Black plays bishop to g4, attacking the queen and rook, but this is where the hidden idea appears. White plays knight to b5. It looks strange and even reckless, but it contains a deadly threat. Knight takes c7, which would deliver a spectacular checkmate. Black suddenly realizes that the winning position has turned into a tactical nightmare. Because of this idea, black cannot simply capture the queen. If they do, knight takes c7 follows immediately, and it is checkmate. The rook on d1 is the final piece of the puzzle, cutting off the black king's escape and sealing the attack. Even if black avoids taking the queen, defending the pawn on c7 is extremely difficult. The knight on b5 is perfectly placed. It threatens mate, blocks the black queen's defensive paths, and also makes it impossible to properly protect the pawn on b7. In just a few moves, black's material advantage becomes meaningless, and the position is already lost. There is more. Alongside the threat of knight takes c7, white also threatens queen takes b7. If this happens, black's position collapses completely. From b7, the queen attacks the rook, targets the knight, and in some lines can even jump to c8 to deliver decisive blows. Some players, realizing they are on the edge of disaster, choose the lesser evil and play queen takes b5, sacrificing their queen to remove the dangerous knight. This stops the immediate checkmate, but it still leaves black losing. Trading queens was never the main objective. The real goal was to win material and reach a clearly winning position. With the queens off the board and extra material in hand, converting the game becomes straightforward. Here is one more aggressive weapon to add to your repertoire. Begin as usual with pawn to e4. If black replies with the Sicilian defense, pawn to c5, continue with pawn to d4, entering the Smith-Morra gambit. After black captures on d4 and white plays pawn to c3, black usually responds with pawn takes c3. White then recaptures with knight to c3, intentionally sacrificing a pawn in exchange for rapid development, open lines, and long-term attacking chances. Black usually continues with a natural move such as knight to c6, matching your development. You answer with knight to f3. At this point, black often becomes cautious. Developing the other knight to f6 immediately allows pawn to e5, which would chase the knight and create uncomfortable complications. To avoid this, many players first choose pawn to d6, stopping the pawn advance and preparing to bring the knight out more safely later. White simply keeps building the position with bishop to c4, placing the bishop on an aggressive square, aiming at the weak pawn on f7 and preparing to castle kingside. Even with the earlier pawn sacrifice, white now enjoys active pieces and strong initiative. Soon after, black finally plays knight to f6. This is when white strikes with pawn to e5 anyway. The position suddenly becomes dangerous for black, especially for players unfamiliar with the theory. One careless move can lead to immediate trouble. If black captures with knight takes e5, white calmly recapture, then black replies with pawn takes a5, keeping the queens on the board and maintaining the attack. Simplification is not the goal here. Winning material is. Then comes the key tactical idea. Bishop takes f7. This familiar pattern appears again, but in a completely different opening. If the black king captures the bishop, the king is dragged into the open, and the white pieces quickly win the queen in the following moves. After this sequence, white emerges with a decisive material advantage and a clearly winning position. Thanks for watching.